"Smile, statue man, you're about to be famous." That's what the tourist said right before he sprayed water all over a royal guard, laughing as the uniform soaked through and filming the entire thing to post as a so-called prank. But what he didn't know was this: the man he mocked wasn't an actor, and this wasn't a game. He was a veteran, a soldier standing in silent tribute to the fallen, those who never returned home. And when Lance Corporal Calder finally broke protocol and spoke, the laughter stopped. The entire courtyard fell into absolute silence. Before we show you what happened next, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you believe there are still things that should be treated with honor. Make sure to subscribe, because what you're about to see just might change the way you view respect forever. On what began as an ordinary Tuesday morning in London, the ancient stones of Buckingham Palace witnessed something that would forever change how millions of people understood the meaning of respect. The courtyard buzzed with its usual collection of international visitors, all eager to catch a glimpse of the legendary Queen's Guard in their iconic red tunics and towering bearskin hats. Among the crowd stood a figure who would soon become infamous across the globe: Sergei Ivan, a Russian content creator whose online presence had earned him extraordinary wealth and influence, held his smartphone with the practiced ease of someone who had turned public humiliation into a lucrative art form. His digital empire, built on 12 million devoted subscribers, thrived on boundary-pushing content that often left innocent bystanders as unwitting participants in his elaborate schemes. The 28-year-old influencer had perfected the formula for viral success: find unsuspecting targets, push them beyond their comfort zones, and monetize their reactions for the entertainment of millions. His Moscow apartment, purchased entirely through advertising revenue from his most controversial videos, served as a testament to the profitability of manufactured outrage. But recent months had brought concerning trends to Sergei's analytics dashboard. View counts were declining, engagement rates were dropping, and his comment sections increasingly filled with complaints about repetitive content. The algorithm that had once favored his provocative style was now demanding fresh innovations. In controversy, the pressure to deliver something spectacular had been building for weeks, and standing before the imposing gates of one of Britain's most revered institutions, Sergei believed he had found his solution. His target stood motionless at the palace entrance, embodying centuries of military tradition. The guard's scarlet uniform was immaculate, every button and buckle reflecting the morning sun with mirror-like precision. His bearskin had added an imposing height that commanded respect from the gathering tourists, while his ceremonial sword remained perfectly positioned at his side. Unknown to Sergei, the man behind the uniform was Lance Corporal James Calder, a decorated veteran whose military service had taken him through some of the most dangerous territories on Earth. The 32-year-old soldier had served multiple deployments in Afghanistan, where he had witnessed both the best and worst of human nature. His chest bore medals that told stories of courage under fire, of comrades lost and battles won, of sacrifices made in service to something greater than personal gain. But to Sergei, examining the scene through his smartphone screen, this was simply another opportunity for content creation. The guard represented nothing more than a silent prop in his next viral performance, a human statue whose stoic demeanor made him the perfect target for public ridicule. The live streaming platform displayed numbers that made Sergei's pulse quicken with anticipation. Over 200,000 viewers had joined his broadcast, drawn by promises of his most audacious stunt yet. The chat window scrolled with messages of encouragement, each comment representing potential revenue through subscriptions, donations, and sponsorship deals. "Today we're going to test the limits of British discipline," Sergei announced to his camera, his accent thick with excitement. "Watch as I demonstrate how these ceremonial guards are nothing more than tourist attractions in fancy costumes." The virtual audience responded with enthusiasm. "This is going to be legendary. Break that robot. Show them what real entertainment looks like." However, scattered among the cheerleading were voices of concern from viewers who sensed something inappropriate about the planned spectacle. "This feels wrong, man. Those guards are actual soldiers. Don't disrespect military service." These warnings went unheeded as Sergei's attention remained fixed on the majority response. Years of content creation had taught him that controversy generated engagement, and engagement translated directly into income. The few dissenting voices were easily drowned out by the chorus of approval from his core audience. An elderly British woman, her silver hair styled in the fashion of someone who had lived through decades of national history, approached Sergei. with evident concern, her handbag, worn from years of use, clutched tightly against her chest as she addressed the young man with the authority of someone who had witnessed the consequences of disrespect firsthand. "Young man," she said, her voice carrying the weight of lived experience, "I strongly advise against whatever you're planning. These guards aren't performers or actors. They're serving soldiers who have earned their positions through dedication and sacrifice." Sergei's response reflected the dismissive attitude that had become his trademark when confronted with criticism. "Listen, lady, this is just entertainment. It's harmless fun. What's the worst that could happen?" He stands there and takes it like they're trained to do. The woman's expression shifted from concern to disgust. "That man has likely seen more hardship and shown more courage than you could comprehend. Show some respect." But Sergei had already turned his attention back to his phone, where the viewer count continued climbing and the comments grew more animated. The algorithm rewarded engagement above all else, and the building anticipation in his chat promised the kind of viral moment that could sustain his career for months. Meanwhile, Calder maintained his ceremonial position with the discipline that had been drilled into him through years of military training. His eyes remained fixed straight ahead, but his peripheral vision captured every detail of the developing situation: the approaching figure with the phone, the growing crowd of onlookers, the subtle shift in atmospheric tension that experienced soldiers learned to recognize as a prelude to confrontation. The plastic water bottle in Sergei's hand had been carefully selected for maximum impact. Its trigger mechanism would deliver a concentrated stream capable of thoroughly soaking his target, while providing the dramatic visual his audience craved. The influencer positioned himself at the optimal angle, ensuring his smartphone camera would capture both his triumphant expression and the guard's anticipated reaction. "Gentlemen and ladies of the internet," Sergei declared to his camera, his voice trembling with barely contained excitement, "you are about to witness something that will break the internet. Watch as I prove that these British guards are nothing more than well-dressed mannequins." The live viewer count had surpassed 300,000, representing one of the largest audiences Sergei had ever commanded. The chat window moved too quickly to read individual messages, but the general sentiment was clear. His followers were hungry for the spectacle he had promised. With theatrical flair that would have impressed professional entertainers, Sergei raised the water bottle toward his target. The morning sun caught the clear plastic, creating a momentary flash that seemed to freeze time itself. The surrounding crowd sensed the approaching moment of truth, their conversations dying away as they turned to witness whatever was about to unfold. Calder, still maintaining his disciplined stance, felt every muscle in his body tense with anticipation. Years of combat experience had honed his ability to sense incoming threats, and every instinct was screaming that he was about to be tested in ways his ceremonial training had never prepared him for. The water erupted from the bottle in a perfect arc, catching the morning light as it traveled through the air before striking Calder directly in the face. The impact was immediate and thorough, soaking through his bearskin hat and running down his cheeks in rivulets that darkened his red tunic. The crowd's collective gasp echoed off the palace walls, a sound that seemed to mark the end of one moment and the beginning of something far more significant. For several seconds, the world seemed suspended in absolute silence. Calder's eyes had closed instinctively when the water hit, but now they opened slowly, revealing an expression that made several onlookers take involuntary steps backward. This wasn't the face of a man playing a role or maintaining a performance. This was the face of a warrior who had been pushed beyond the limits of his professional restraint. Sergei's triumphant grin began to falter as he realized that something fundamental had shifted. The guard's reaction wasn't the stoic acceptance he had expected. Instead, there was something in those eyes that spoke of experiences far beyond anything Sergei had ever encountered. Something that transformed the moment from comedy into something approaching tragedy. The silence stretched until it became unbearable, broken only by the distant sounds of London traffic and the nervous shuffling of tourists' feet. Then, with mechanical precision that spoke of years of military discipline, Calder turned his head. His body remained at attention, but his gaze fixed on Sergei with an intensity that made the influencer's smartphone screen seem suddenly inadequate as a shield. When Calder finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority earned through experiences that no amount of social media success could replicate. "Do you understand what this uniform represents?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, each word carefully chosen and delivered with the precision of a man accustomed to making every syllable count. Sergei's confident demeanor cracked visibly, his usual quick wit abandoning him when faced with a response he hadn't anticipated. The guard was supposed to remain silent, to suffer the indignity with professional restraint while Sergei's audience laughed at his expense. Instead, this man was speaking with a dignity that made the prank seem suddenly childish and cruel. Isn't it just ceremonial?" Sergei stammered, his voice lacking the confidence that had made him famous. Like a costume for the tourists, the words seemed to physically impact the surrounding crowd. Several people gasped audibly, while others shook their heads in disbelief. The elderly woman who had tried to warn Sergei earlier closed her eyes, as if witnessing something too painful to watch. Even the live stream chat, which had been celebrating moments before, suddenly filled with messages of concern and disapproval. Calder's expression remained controlled, but his voice took on an edge that spoke of barely contained emotion. "This uniform has been worn by men who never returned from the fields of France, who gave their lives in the frozen wastes of the Falklands, who bled and died in the mountains of Afghanistan. It represents sacrifice that you clearly lack the maturity to comprehend." The crowd began to create more space around the two men, sensing that they were witnessing something that transcended typical tourist entertainment. Parents instinctively moved their children further away, while other observers found themselves unable to look away from what was becoming a profound moment of reckoning. Sergei's phone continued recording, still broadcasting to his hundreds of thousands of followers. But the influencer was beginning to realize that this wasn't the kind of content that would enhance his reputation. The guard's words carried a weight that made mockery impossible, transforming what should have been a moment of triumph into something approaching humiliation. "Look, I didn't mean anything serious," Sergei said, his voice cracking slightly. "It's just water. People need to learn to take a joke. This is what my audience wants to see." Calder's response came with the measured cadence of someone who had learned to speak truth even when it was uncomfortable. "Your audience wants to see cruelty masquerading as entertainment. They want to see dignity degraded for their amusement. But what they're actually seeing is the difference between a man who stands for something and one who stands for nothing." The surrounding atmosphere had shifted completely. What had begun as a light-hearted prank had become something far more serious. A confrontation between two fundamentally different worldviews played out in front of an audience that was beginning to question their own complicity in the spectacle. Calder's next words would be remembered and quoted for years to come. A moment when authentic human dignity confronted manufactured entertainment with devastating effectiveness. "You see these?" He gestured toward the medals on his chest, each one representing experiences that had shaped him into the man he had become. "This medal was earned during a tour where I served alongside Sergeant Michael Thompson, a 24-year-old from Yorkshire who joined the army to provide for his pregnant wife. He died instantly when an improvised explosive device detonated in a Kabul marketplace. His life ended while he was trying to protect civilians who were simply shopping for their family's dinner." The crowd had fallen into absolute silence, hanging on every word as Calder continued his devastating testimony. Sergei's live stream audience, which had grown to over 400,000 viewers, found themselves witnessing something unprecedented, a moment of genuine human dignity in response to thoughtless cruelty. "This one," Calder continued, touching another medal, "represents the service of Private Danny Williams, 19 years old, from a small town in Wales. He had dreams of becoming a teacher when his military service ended. Instead, he stepped on a landmine while trying to rescue a wounded interpreter. It took him 23 minutes to die, and he spent every moment asking me to tell his mother that he loved her." Sergei's face had drained of color, his usual confidence replaced by something that looked suspiciously like shame. The water bottle hung forgotten in his hand as he began to comprehend the weight of what he had mocked. "And this medal," Calder's voice grew quieter but more intense, "honors the memory of Corporal Sarah Mitchell, the first woman to serve in our unit. She was brilliant, brave, and tougher than any of us had a right to expect. She saved my life on 3 separate occasions. The last time, she wasn't able to save her own. 27 years old, with a master's degree in engineering and plans to help rebuild the communities we were trying to protect." The elderly woman in the crowd was openly weeping now, her hand pressed to her mouth as she absorbed the weight of Calder's words. Other observers had removed their hats in respect, recognizing that they were witnessing something sacred being defended against desecration. "You want to know what Corporal Mitchell would say about your little performance?" Calder asked, his gaze never wavering from Sergei's face. "She would say that you represent everything we fought against, the willingness to cause harm for personal gain, the inability to recognize that some things are more important than individual entertainment. Sergei attempted to respond, but found himself speechless for perhaps the first time in his adult life. The confident smirk that had made him wealthy had vanished, replaced by an expression that his followers were interpreting as genuine remorse. The sound of approaching sirens could be heard in the distance, growing steadily louder as law enforcement responded to reports of a disturbance at the palace. But the real judgment was already taking place in the court of public opinion. Broadcast lived to an audience that was beginning to understand the true cost of their entertainment. The police vehicles appeared at the edge of the crowd, their blue lights flashing as uniformed officers began making their way through the gathering of tourists and onlookers. But their arrival seemed almost anticlimactic compared to the moral reckoning that was already taking place between Sergei and Calder. The most tragic part of this entire situation, Calder continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned the right to speak about sacrifice, is that you've turned their memory into a punchline. These men and women died believing that their sacrifice would protect something valuable, something worth preserving. They died believing that future generations would understand the cost of the freedom they enjoyed. Sergei's live stream had reached nearly 500,000 viewers, but the comments were no longer supportive. Instead, they reflected a growing understanding of what the audience was really witnessing. This is heartbreaking. I never thought about it this way. That guard is a hero. I'm ashamed I was laughing. The lead police officer, a veteran constable with decades of experience dealing with London's daily chaos, approached the scene with the measured caution of someone who recognized that this was more than a simple tourist disturbance. Her trained eye took in the crowd's atmosphere, the guard's wet uniform, and the influencer's obvious distress. "What's the situation here?" she asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to restoring order to chaotic situations. Before Sergei could formulate a response, multiple voices from the crowd began speaking simultaneously. "He assaulted the guard, sprayed him with water while he was on duty. It's all on video. He was making fun of military service." The officer's expression hardened as she absorbed the information. Assaulting a member of the Queen's Guard was a serious offense under British law, but she could see that the situation involved more than simple criminal behavior. The crowd's energy suggested something deeper had occurred, something that had transformed a simple prank into a moment of profound significance. "Sir," she addressed Sergei directly, "I'm going to need you to end your recording and come with me for questioning." "But officer," Sergei protested, his voice cracking with desperation, "this is all a misunderstanding. I'm a content creator with millions of followers. This is just entertainment. Nobody was actually hurt." The officer's response was swift and decisive. "Entertainment doesn't exempt you from the law. You've assaulted a serving member of the military during his official duties. The fact that you recorded it for your audience makes it worse, not better." As she began to place handcuffs on Sergei's wrists, the full scope of his situation began to dawn on him. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience that could be resolved with an apology and a legal fee. This was a career-defining moment that would follow him for the rest of his life. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the courtyard. As Sergei's wrists were secured behind his back, his smartphone clattered to the ground, but the live stream continued broadcasting, giving his audience an unfiltered view of his arrest and the collapse of his carefully constructed public persona. "This is insane," Sergei protested, his voice rising with panic. "I'm a public figure. I have 12 million subscribers. This is just content creation. Everyone knows influencers push boundaries." The arresting officer's response was delivered with the calm professionalism of someone who had heard similar protests countless times before. "Your subscriber count doesn't grant you immunity from the law. You've committed assault, and your victim was a serving member of the military. The fact that you broadcast it to millions of people doesn't minimize the offense, it amplifies it." Calder, who had remained silent during the arrest proceedings, finally spoke again. "Officer, I want you to know that this individual has been recording everything. His entire social media platform is built on humiliating people for entertainment. I believe you'll find extensive evidence of his behavior patterns." The crowd had swelled to include hundreds of onlookers, many of whom were now recording the scene with their own devices. But unlike Sergei's exploitative approach, these recordings captured something different, a moment when justice was served and dignity was defended. As Sergei was led toward the police vehicle, his phone continued broadcasting from where it had fallen. His audience was witnessing something unprecedented, the complete destruction of an influencer's career in real time. The comments section reflected this shift. He got what he deserved. That guard is a better man than all of us. I'm unsubscribing from this garbage. This is what happens when you forget that actions have consequences. The elderly woman who had tried to warn Sergei earlier approached Calder with genuine concern. Are you all right, young man? That was a terrible thing to do to you. I'm fine, ma'am, Calder replied, his voice returning to its professional tone. Just doing my job. But she could see beyond his professional facade to the human being beneath. You did much more than your job today. You stood up for something important when it would have been easier to stay silent. News of the incident was already spreading beyond the immediate audience. Social media platforms were buzzing with clips of Calder's response, but the narrative was clear. This wasn't about a prank gone wrong. This was about a moment when authentic human dignity confronted manufactured controversy, and emerged victorious. Major news outlets were beginning to pick up the story, recognizing it as something more significant than typical internet drama. The incident was being framed as a cultural moment, a turning point in how society viewed the responsibilities of content creators and the limits of acceptable entertainment. The police vehicle carrying Sergei disappeared into London traffic, but the impact of what had occurred continued to reverberate through the digital landscape. Within hours, the footage had been shared millions of times across every major social media platform, but not in the way Sergei had intended. Instead of celebrating his audacity, viewers were sharing Calder's response as an example of dignity under pressure. The hashtag #RespectTheGuard began trending globally, accompanied by stories from veterans, active service members, and military families who felt that Calder's words had given voice to their own experiences with disrespect and misunderstanding. The movement grew organically, driven not by marketing algorithms, but by genuine human emotion and shared values. Meanwhile, Sergei's business empire was beginning to crumble with unprecedented speed. Sponsors were terminating contracts, booking agents were canceling appearances, and his management team was scrambling to contain the damage. But the video evidence was irrefutable, and the public response was overwhelmingly negative. The influencer marketing industry was also feeling the shock waves. Brands were reevaluating their partnerships with controversial content creators, recognizing that association with disrespectful behavior could permanently damage their own reputations. The incident was becoming a case study in business schools, an example of how quickly a personal brand could be destroyed by a single moment of poor judgment. Calder, meanwhile, completed his shift with the same professionalism he had displayed throughout the ordeal. His fellow guards and superior officers commended him for his restraint and dignity under pressure, but he remained focused on his duties rather than the growing media attention. As evening approached, the story was being covered by international news networks. The BBC led with royalguards' dignified response to tourist assault. CNN's headline read, "Viral video shows power of respect in face of disrespect." Even outlets that typically avoided internet culture stories recognized this as something more significant than typical online drama. The broader cultural conversation was shifting as well. Parents were using the incident as a teaching moment for their children, explaining why respect for military service matters and why actions have consequences. Educators were incorporating the story into lessons about digital citizenship and the responsibilities that come with online platforms. Veterans organizations around the world were sharing the video, using it as an example of why traditional military values remain relevant in the modern era. The response transcended national boundaries, with service members from multiple countries expressing support for Calder's words and condemnation of Sergei's actions. In the holding cell of a London police station, Sergei faced the full scope of his situation for the first time, without the distraction of cameras, comments, or the constant validation of his online audience. The charges against him were serious: assault, disorderly conduct, and breach of the peace. His legal team was already working on a defense strategy, but the video evidence made denial impossible. The financial implications were becoming clearer as, well, lost sponsorship deals were costing him hundreds of thousands of pounds, while the legal fees for his defense would consume much of his remaining resources. More importantly, the damage to his reputation appeared irreversible. The internet had a long memory, and this incident would follow him for the rest of his career. His social media accounts, once filled with adoring fans and profitable engagement, were now dominated by criticism and calls for accountability. The algorithm that had once rewarded his controversial content was now working against him, amplifying negative responses and reducing his reach with each passing hour. But perhaps the most significant change was in how his audience viewed him. Many of his followers were experiencing a moment of moral awakening, questioning their own complicity in creating a culture that valued shock value over human dignity. The comments on his platforms reflected this shift. "I used to think this was funny, but now I see how wrong it was. That guard's words really made me think about what entertainment should be. I'm ashamed I encouraged this behavior. This isn't content, it's cruelty." The cultural impact extended far beyond Sergei's personal consequences. The incident was sparking conversations about the responsibilities of content creators, the ethics of pranking strangers, and the importance of treating all people with dignity regardless of their profession or circumstances. Educational institutions were incorporating the story into their curricula, using it as a case study in digital ethics and the power of social media to both create and destroy reputations. Business schools were analyzing the rapid collapse of Sergei's brand as an example of how quickly public opinion could shift in the digital age. The incident was also influencing policy discussions about online behavior and the regulation of social media platforms. Lawmakers were citing it as evidence of the need for stronger protections against harassment and exploitation in digital spaces. Meanwhile, support for Calder continued to grow. Military charities reported increased donations, with many contributors specifically mentioning his dignified response as their inspiration. The incident had reminded people of the sacrifices made by service members and the importance of honoring their contributions to society. As the sun set over London, casting long shadows across the palace courtyard where the confrontation had occurred, the full significance of the day's events was becoming apparent. What had begun as a simple prank had evolved into a global conversation about respect, dignity, and the responsibilities that come with digital platforms. Calder returned to his quarters after completing his shift, unaware that his words had been heard by millions of people around the world. His response had been instinctive, born from years of military service and a deep understanding of what the uniform represented. He had simply spoken his truth, but in doing so, he had touched something universal in the human experience. The incident had demonstrated the power of authentic human dignity in the face of manufactured controversy. Calder's words had resonated not because they were planned or rehearsed, but because they came from a place of genuine conviction and personal experience. In an age of artificial content and calculated responses, his authenticity had been revolutionary. For Sergei, the night brought no relief from the consequences of his actions. His career was effectively over, his reputation destroyed, and his future uncertain. The video would remain online forever, a permanent reminder of the moment when his pursuit of viral fame had crossed a line from which there was no return. But the story was bigger than either man involved. It had become a touchstone for discussions about online behavior, military service, and the nature of respect in the digital age. The incident would be remembered not as a prank gone wrong, but as a moment when society collectively decided that some things were too important to be mocked. The global response had shown that beneath the surface of internet culture, people still valued authentic human dignity over manufactured entertainment. The millions who had shared Calder's response had done so not because it was shocking or controversial, but because it was true. As the weeks and months that followed would prove, the incident had marked a turning point in how society viewed the responsibilities of content creators and the limits of acceptable entertainment. The days of consequence-free pranking were ending, replaced by a new understanding that all people deserve to be treated with dignity, regardless of their profession or circumstances. The uniform that Sergei had mocked continued to represent everything Calder had described: sacrifice, honor, and service to something greater than personal gain. And in defending that representation, he had reminded the world that some values are worth preserving, even in an age of digital chaos. The story would be told and retold, analyzed and discussed for years to come, but its essential message remained simple: respect is not optional, dignity matters. And sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is simply to speak the truth with conviction and grace. In the end, Sergei had achieved his goal of creating viral content, but instead of being remembered as a clever entertainer, he had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of pursuing fame without consideration for its impact on others. And Calder, who had never sought attention or recognition, had become a symbol of the enduring power of human dignity in the face of manufactured controversy.